The dust from Eleanor Hartwell's carriage settled on Main Street like a pronouncement, and every soul in redemption. Texas knew that the banker's daughter had returned from Boston with ideas far above her station. It was the spring of 1878, and the town had grown accustomed to dirt under fingernails and dreams kept modest. But Eleanor stepped down from that carriage wearing silk the color of midnight, an expression that suggested she had tasted something finer than what this sun-scorched piece of earth could offer. Tom Garrett watched from outside the livery stable, his hands still black with axle grease, his hat pushed back on sun-darkened hair. He had known Eleanor before she left, back when they were both young enough to race horses through the creek bed without caring about propriety. That was 6 years ago, before her father struck it rich with the bank, before she was sent east to become a lady. Now she moved like music through the dusty street, and Tom felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. "Boys got no chance," old Murphy muttered, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Girl like that won't look twice at a cowboy who smells like horses." Tom said nothing, just wiped his hands on his work pants and watched Eleanor disappear into her father's grand house at the end of town. It was the finest structure in Redemption, 2 stories of painted wood that seemed to mock every other building's weathered gray. But Tom had noticed something in those brief seconds when Eleanor's eyes swept the street. She had looked tired, he thought. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with travel. That evening, Tom rode out to the hill that overlooked the valley. It was his favorite spot, a place where the land rolled away in waves of golden grass, and the sky stretched so wide, it made a man feel both small and infinite at once. He had saved nearly every dollar from his work at the Henderson Ranch, money tucked away in a leather pouch under his bunk. Most cowboys spent their pay on whiskey and cards, but Tom had been saving for something, though he had never quite admitted to himself what that something was. Now, looking down at the lights of Redemption beginning to glow in the dusk, he thought maybe he knew. The next Sunday, Eleanor attended church in a dress of emerald green that made every other woman look like they were wearing sackcloth. Tom sat 3 pews back, listening to Reverend Walsh drone on about pride and humility, watching the way sunlight caught in Eleanor's dark hair. She sat straight as a rifle barrel, her gloved hands folded in her lap, and she did not turn around once during the entire service. After, on the church steps, Tom found his feet carrying him toward her before his brain could argue the wisdom of it. She was surrounded by townswomen, Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Rodriguez, asking polite questions about Boston while their eyes cataloged every expensive detail of her outfit. Eleanor answered with practiced grace, but Tom caught something brittle in her smile. "Miss Hartwell," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he expected. "Welcome home." Eleanor's eyes met his, and for just a moment, something flickered there, a recognition that went beyond simple memory. "Tom Garrett," she said, and he was surprised she remembered his name. "I hear you are working for Mr. Henderson now." "Yes, ma'am. 3 years now. How industrious." The words could have been dismissive, but there was something in her tone that suggested she meant them genuinely. Before Tom could respond, Eleanor's father appeared at her elbow, Edward Hartwell in his fine suit and gold watch chain, looking at Tom the way a man might look at a stray dog that had wandered too close to his dinner table. "Eleanor, the carriage is waiting," Hartwell said, his voice clipped with Yankee precision despite 20 years in Texas. Tom stepped back, touching the brim of his hat. "Ma'am," he said, and watched her be led away like a prize mare being returned to its stable. "Told you," Murphy said from behind him. "Too proud for the likes of us." But Tom had seen something in Eleanor's eyes, a flash of something that looked almost like longing, or maybe he was a fool, seeing what he wanted to see. Either way, he rode out to the hill that evening and stood there until the stars came out, looking at the land and thinking about foundations. The weeks that followed were strange ones. Eleanor appeared in town regularly, always dressed like she was attending a governor's ball, always moving through Redemption as though she existed on a different plane from everyone else. The townspeople whispered, They said she was putting on airs, that Boston had ruined her, that she thought herself too good for honest Texas folk. Tom heard the talk in the saloon, at the general store, everywhere men and women gathered to pass judgment. But Tom watched, and what he saw did not match the gossip. He saw Eleanor stop to help Mrs. Chen when the older woman dropped her parcels, kneeling in the dust in her fine dress to gather scattered vegetables. He saw her spend an hour talking to young Maria Rodriguez, who wanted to learn to read, promising to lend her books from her father's library. These were not the actions of a woman consumed by pride, Tom thought. These were the actions of someone trying to find her place in a world that had shifted beneath her feet. One afternoon in early June, Tom rode into town to pick up supplies and found Eleanor standing outside the general store, staring at a notice board. She was alone for once, without her father's shadow or the cluster of curious townswomen. Tom dismounted and walked over, close enough to see what had captured her attention. It was an advertisement for a teaching position in San Antonio, 200 miles south. "Thinking of leaving already?" Tom asked, Eleanor startled, her hand going to her throat. Up close, Tom could see faint shadows under her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that spoke of sleepless nights. "Mr. Garrett, you have a habit of appearing unexpectedly. Hazard of being a cowboy, we are trained to move quiet so as not to spook the cattle." He nodded toward the notice. "You would make a good teacher, I reckon." Something in Eleanor's expression cracked just slightly. "My father would never allow it. He has other plans for my future." "What kind of plans?" "The kind that involve marrying me off to his business associate in Dallas." "A man of 45 who has already buried 2 wives. Her voice was flat, empty of everything except resignation. "Father says it is a practical match. Mr. Vernon owns 3 banks and has political connections." Tom felt anger kindle in his gut, hot and sudden. "And what do you say?" Eleanor looked at him then, really looked at him, and Tom saw something break behind those careful eyes. "I say that I spent 6 years learning to be a lady, learning to pour tea and make polite conversation and play the pianoforte, and all of it was just preparation for being sold to the highest bidder." Her voice cracked on the last word and she turned away quickly, but not before Tom saw the shine of tears. "Eleanor," he said, and her name felt both foreign and right on his tongue, "you do not have to do what he wants. Do I not? I am a woman with no money of my own, no prospects except what my father provides. What exactly do you suggest I do, Mr. Garrett? Run away and become a saloon girl?" The bitterness in her voice cut like barbed wire. Tom thought about the money under his bunk, about the hill that overlooked the valley, about the plans that had been taking shape in his mind for weeks now. He thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea, and then he thought about Eleanor married to some old banker in Dallas, her spirit slowly crushed under the weight of propriety and practicality. "I suggest you give me a chance," Tom said. Eleanor stared at him. "What?" "Give me a chance to offer you something different. 3 months, that is all I am asking. 3 months before you agree to your father's plans." "Tom, that is insane. You barely know me anymore. I barely know you." "Then let us fix that. Let us see if the people we were are still somewhere inside the people we have become." Tom knew he sounded half crazy, knew every sensible part of him was screaming to stop talking, but he pressed on anyway. "I am not rich, Eleanor. I do not have banks or political connections. But I am good with my hands, and I have been saving my pay, and I have land." "You have land?" "Bought it last year. 200 acres up on the hill overlooking the valley, best view in 3 counties. Tom felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "I know what people say about you. That you are too proud for a cowboy, but I do not think that is true. I think you are proud of who you are, and there is nothing wrong with that. I think you are scared of being trapped, and I cannot blame you for that either." Eleanor was crying now, tears tracking through the powder on her cheeks, and Tom wanted to reach out and wipe them away but did not dare. "Why are you saying these things?" "Because 6 years ago, you and I raced horses through the creek bed, and you laughed like you were free, and I have never forgotten that sound. Because you came back to redemption looking like a princess, but moving like a prisoner. Because I have been half in love with you since we were kids, and I figure it is time I did something about it." The words hung in the hot afternoon air between them. From inside the general store, Tom could hear Mrs. Patterson talking to her daughter about the price of flour. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The whole world kept moving, indifferent to the fact that Tom had just laid his heart out like cards on a poker table. 3 months, Eleanor said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 months. "And what exactly do you propose we do with this time?" Tom smiled, the first real smile he had felt in weeks. "I propose I court you proper. And I propose I build you a house on that hill so you can see for yourself what I am offering. You are going to build a house in 3 months." "I am going to try my damnedest," Eleanor laughed, and it was a broken, desperate sound, but it was real. "My father will lose his mind. Let him. You are over 21, Eleanor. He cannot actually stop you from seeing who you want to see. You do not know my father, maybe not. But I know what I want, and I am willing to fight for it." Tom reached out then, very slowly, and took her gloved hand in his. "Let me fight for it, Eleanor. Let me fight for you." She looked down at their joined hands for a long moment, then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. 3 months, Tom Garrett, but I am warning you now, I am difficult and opinionated, and I have no idea how to be a rancher's wife." "Good," Tom said. "I have no interest in you being anything other than exactly who you are." That was how it started. Tom began riding into town every Sunday after church, and he and Eleanor would walk together down by the creek, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about Boston, about the endless parties where she was displayed like merchandise, about the cold winters and the crowded streets, and the overwhelming sense of not belonging. He told her about life on the Henderson Ranch, about the spring roundups and the satisfaction of good, honest work, about the plans he had been sketching on scraps of paper for months now. Meanwhile, Tom rode out to his land every evening after work and began building. He had spent years watching carpenters and builders, and while he was no master craftsman, he knew enough to make something solid. The house would be simple, but it would be sturdy. 2 rooms to start with room to add more later. A wide porch where a person could sit and watch the sunset. Windows facing east to catch the morning light. Word spread through redemption faster than wildfire. Tom Garrett was building a house on the hill. Tom Garrett was courting Eleanor Hartwell. The gossip reached a fever pitch, fueled by disbelief and scandalous delight. Edward Hartwell showed up at the Henderson Ranch one evening, his face red with fury, demanding that Tom leave his daughter alone. Tom listened politely, then said that Eleanor was a grown woman capable of making her own choices, and if Hartwell had a problem with that, he could take it up with her. Hartwell did take it up with her. The whole town heard the shouting match that erupted in the Hartwell house that night, but Eleanor did not back down. She appeared in church the next Sunday with her head high and her hand on Tom's arm, and that was answer enough. June melted into July and the house began to take shape. Tom worked every spare moment, sometimes by moonlight, his hands blistered and aching. Other cowboys from the Henderson Ranch started showing up to help, bringing lumber and nails, offering advice and extra hands. Even some of the townspeople who had whispered about Eleanor's pride found themselves won over by Tom's determination. Old Murphy hauled stones for the fireplace. Mrs. Chen's husband, who had been a carpenter in San Francisco, spent 3 days helping with the roof frame. Mrs. Rodriguez sent food enough to feed the growing crew of volunteers. Eleanor came to see the progress every week, riding out with Tom on Sunday afternoons. The first time she saw the foundation, she stood silent for a long time, her hand pressed to her mouth. "You are really doing this," she said finally. "Told you I would." "Tom, I have to tell you something." Eleanor turned to face him, and her expression was serious. "I do not know if I can be what you need. I have spent so long learning to be someone else that I am not sure who I really am anymore. What if you build this house and I disappoint you? What if I cannot adapt to this life?" Tom took both her hands in his, rough calluses against soft kid leather. Eleanor, I am not asking you to be anything except honest. You want to read books. Read books. You want to have opinions about politics. Have opinions. You want to wear fancy dresses or work pants or anything in between. Your choice. I am building this house for you, not for some idea of who I think you should be. I am building it because when I picture my future, you are in it, and I want to give you a place where you can be whoever you are meant to be. She kissed him then, right there on the hill with the half-built house framing them and the valley spreading out below. It was the first time they had kissed, and it tasted like salt and hope and the beginning of something that felt like coming home. July burned into August, and the house grew walls and a roof and windows that caught the light just right. Tom installed a wood stove, built shelves for books, carved a railing for the porch with his own aching hands. Eleanor came more often now, sometimes bringing sandwiches for the workers, sometimes just sitting on an overturned bucket and watching the progress with something like wonder in her eyes. They talked about everything during those long summer days. Eleanor confessed that she had hated Boston, hated the constant judgment and the suffocating rules about what a lady could and could not do. Tom told her about losing his parents when he was 16, about learning to be a man too fast, about the loneliness that came with always being on the move. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms, both hated coffee that was too sweet, both dreamed of things bigger than what they had been born into. You want children? Eleanor asked one afternoon, sitting on the porch steps while Tom sanded the front door. Someday, if God wills it. You. I think so, but I want them to be free, Tom. I want them to grow up knowing they can choose their own paths, not have everything decided for them before they can even speak. She looked out at the valley, her expression distant. My father decided my entire life for me. Where I would go, what I would learn, who I would marry, I will not do that to my children. Then we will not, Tom said simply. Any children we have will be raised to think for themselves, even if it makes us gray before our time. We, Eleanor repeated softly. You say that like it is inevitable. Tom set down the sandpaper and came to sit beside her. Eleanor Hartwell, I have been in love with you since you beat me in that horse race when we were 15. I have spent 3 months building you a house and courting you proper and trying to prove that I am worth taking a chance on. So yes, I say we like it is inevitable, because I intend to marry you if you will have me, and I intend to love you until the day I die. Eleanor was quiet for so long that Tom felt his heart begin to sink. Then she said, My father has cut me off. Did I mention that? 2 weeks ago, he told me that if I continued to see you, I would not get a penny of his money, no dowry, no inheritance, nothing. I did not know that. I thought you should know what you are getting. A woman with nothing but the clothes in her wardrobe and a head full of impractical ideas. Tom laughed, relief flooding through him. Eleanor, I do not want your father's money, I never did. I want you with your impractical ideas and your fierce independence and your terrible habit of crying during thunderstorms. I do not cry during thunderstorms. You did last week. I saw you through the window. Those were not tears, those were rain droplets on my face. From inside the house. But she was smiling now, and Tom felt the last piece of his world slide into place. Marry me, he said. Not because you have nowhere else to go and not because I have built you a house. Marry me because you want to wake up next to me every morning and argue about politics over breakfast and build a life that is ours and nobody else's. Eleanor took his face in her hands, her gray eyes searching his. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she said, Yes. Yes, Tom Garrett, I will marry you. And we will probably drive each other half insane and we will definitely scandalize the entire town, and I cannot promise I will be any good at being a rancher's wife. But yes. They were married 3 weeks later by Reverend Walsh, in a simple ceremony that shocked absolutely no one who had been paying attention. Eleanor wore a dress of cream-colored linen that she had sewn herself, having sold most of her fancy Boston gowns to the dressmaker in town. Tom wore his best shirt and pants, and his hands shook only a little when he slipped the gold ring onto Eleanor's finger. The ring had belonged to his mother, the only thing of value his parents had left him, and Eleanor cried when she saw it. Edward Hartwell did not attend. He had made good on his threat, disowning Eleanor completely and forbidding anyone in his household from speaking to her. It hurt, Tom knew, even though Eleanor tried to pretend it did not. She stood tall during the ceremony, her voice steady as she spoke her vows, but Tom felt the tremor in her hand when he held it. The townspeople came, though. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Rodriguez stood near the front, both women dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Old Murphy showed up in a clean shirt, which was probably the closest thing to formal where he owned. Half the cowboys from the Henderson ranch crowded into the back pews, grinning and elbowing each other. Even Mr. Henderson himself attended, giving Tom a rare nod of approval. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the town hall. Someone had organized food and someone else had brought a fiddle, and before Tom quite knew what was happening, he was being dragged onto a makeshift dance floor with Eleanor laughing in his arms. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by people who had decided that maybe, just maybe, love mattered more than pride or propriety, or what was considered sensible. As the evening wound down, Tom borrowed a wagon and drove Eleanor up to the house on the hill. Their house now, legally and truly. He had spent the last few days moving in furniture, simple pieces he had bought or built himself. There was a bed with a real mattress, a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair that Tom had found at an estate sale and painstakingly refinished. It was not much, but it was theirs. Eleanor stood in the middle of the main room, turning slowly to take it all in. The wood stove glowing with warmth against the cooling evening air. The bookshelves waiting to be filled. The windows framing the view of the valley like living paintings. "Tom," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is perfect." "It is a work in progress," Tom said. "We will add to it as we can. Another room or 2, maybe a barn for horses, definitely a bigger porch. But for now it is home." Eleanor turned to face him, and in the lamplight, she looked both exactly like the girl he remembered and entirely someone new. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of being trapped, afraid of losing myself, afraid of being nothing more than someone's property. But standing here in this house you built with your own hands, I do not feel afraid anymore. I feel free." Tom crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her against him. "You are free, Eleanor, you always were. I just wanted to give you a place worthy of it." They made love that night in their own bed, in their own house, with the windows open to let in the cool breeze and the sound of crickets singing in the grass. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking softly about their plans. Eleanor wanted to start teaching, maybe open a small school for the children in the valley who were too far from town to attend regular classes. Tom wanted to expand his herd, maybe breed horses eventually. They both wanted to build something that mattered, something that was theirs. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, as Tom supposed all marriages were. Eleanor had to learn to cook on a wood stove, and her first attempts resulted in burned biscuits and soup that was somehow simultaneously watery and scorched. Tom had to learn to remember that his wife was not fragile just because she had been raised in comfort, and that sometimes when she snapped at him over something small, it was really about something big she did not know how to express. They argued about money, about chores, about whether they should buy more cattle or save for a rainy day, but they also learned each other. Tom discovered that Eleanor sang while she washed dishes, old hymns from her childhood mixed with bawdy saloon songs she claimed to have picked up from Mrs. Rodriguez. Eleanor learned that Tom talked to the horses when he thought no one was listening, long, rambling conversations about his day and his worries and his hopes. They developed rhythms, small routines that felt like home. Morning coffee on the porch watching the sunrise. Evening walks through the property discussing improvements. Nighttime reading by lamplight, Eleanor working through the books she had brought from her father's library while Tom sketched plans for a barn. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the north with ice and biting wind. The house proved solid, the walls thick enough to keep out the worst of the cold, the fireplace drawing clean and warm. Tom had stocked up on firewood and provisions, having learned from previous harsh winters to prepare. They spent long evenings inside, and Eleanor finally began teaching Tom to read properly. He could manage basic words enough to get by, but Eleanor taught him to really read, to understand the flow of sentences and the beauty of well-chosen language. "You are smart," she said one night, watching him work through a passage from a novel she loved. "You pick things up faster than most of the students I tutored in Boston." "I am motivated," Tom said, glancing up from the page. "If I am going to keep up with my brilliant wife, I need to improve my mind." "Tom Garrett, are you saying I am intimidating, absolutely terrifying? Why do you think I fell in love with you?" Eleanor threw a pillow at him, and Tom caught it laughing, and somehow they ended up wrestling on the floor like children, breathless and grinning. Later, curled up together in front of the fire, Eleanor said quietly, "I am happy. I did not think I would be, but I am." "Good," Tom said, kissing the top of her head. "That is all I ever wanted." Spring arrived with a rush of wildflowers and warm rain, and with it came news that shook redemption to its core. Edward Hartwell had died, suddenly and without warning, his heart giving out in the middle of a business meeting. The funeral was well attended, as funerals for rich men tend to be, but Tom noticed how few people seemed genuinely grieved. Hartwell had been respected but not loved, feared but not missed. Eleanor stood at the graveside with dry eyes, her face expressionless. Tom stood beside her, his hand on her elbow, ready to catch her if she fell, but she did not fall. She stood straight through the entire service, and only when they were back home, sitting on their porch watching the sun set over the valley, did she finally speak. "I should feel sadder," she said. "He was my father." "You feel what you feel," Tom said. "There is no should about it. He cut me out of his life because I chose you. He would rather have disowned me than accept that I had a right to make my own choices. How am I supposed to mourn that?" Tom had no answer, so he just held her hand and let her talk. Let her work through the complicated tangle of emotions that came with losing a parent you had never quite understood. She talked until the stars came out, and Tom listened to every word, and by the end of it, Eleanor seemed lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth had lifted a weight she had been carrying for years. The reading of the will was held the following week. Tom went with Eleanor, more for moral support than anything else, expecting nothing. Edward Hartwell's lawyer, a thin, nervous man named Peterson, looked uncomfortable as he shuffled through papers. The bulk of the estate went to the bank, to be managed by a board of directors. Various small bequests went to business associates and distant relatives. And then Peterson cleared his throat and said, "To my daughter Eleanor, if she can be found, I leave the original land deed to the property now known as the Hartwell Estate, purchased in 1855, as well as a sum of $2,000 in private savings, with the stipulation that it be used as she sees fit without interference from any man." Eleanor sat very still. $2,000 was a fortune, more money than Tom would see in 5 years of cowboy work, and the land deed that was valuable too, prime property in the heart of town. "He left me something," Eleanor said wonderingly. "After everything, he still left me something." "Maybe he regretted how things ended," Tom suggested. "Maybe this was his way of trying to make amends." They sold the property to a developer who wanted to build a new mercantile, and Eleanor used part of the money to open her school. It was a small building, just one room really, but it had a chalkboard and desks and books, so many books that they lined every wall. Children from all over the valley started attending, ranch kids who had never had access to education before, and Eleanor threw herself into teaching with a passion that made her glow. Tom used some of the money to buy breeding stock, good horses with solid bloodlines. He had a gift for working with animals, a patience and understanding that made even the most skittish creatures trust him. Within a year, he had a reputation as the best horse trainer in the county, and buyers started coming from as far as San Antonio to purchase his stock. Life fell into a pattern that was both challenging and deeply satisfying. Tom would rise before dawn to work the horses, while Eleanor prepared lessons for her students. They would meet for midday dinner, sharing the events of their morning, then return to their respective work. Evenings were spent together, improving the property, reading, talking about everything under the sun. They argued sometimes, passionate debates about politics or methods or priorities, but they always made up before bed, both having agreed early on that anger was not worth carrying into sleep. 2 years after their wedding, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Tom one evening in early summer, standing on their porch watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, and Tom felt his heart stop and restart in the space of a breath. "A baby," he repeated, the word feeling huge and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "Eleanor, are you sure?" Dr. Mills confirmed it this morning. "I am about 3 months along, he thinks. Due sometime in January." Tom whooped, a loud, joyful sound that sent birds scattering from nearby trees and swept Eleanor up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down carefully, his hands gentle on her waist. "You are going to be a mother. I am going to be a father. We are going to have a family. Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, and there was a vulnerability in her voice that Tom recognized, the old fear that she might not be enough. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Tom said, pulling her close. "Eleanor, you have given me everything, a home, a purpose, a life that matters, and now a child. How could I be anything but grateful?" The pregnancy was difficult at times. Eleanor suffered from sickness that lasted well beyond the first few months, and there were days when she could barely keep food down. But she continued teaching as long as she was able, finally closing the school for the winter when she became too large and uncomfortable to stand for long periods. Tom fussed over her constantly, driving her half crazy with his worry until she finally snapped that she was pregnant, not dying, and he needed to stop treating her like glass. "I am scared," Tom admitted one night, lying beside her in bed with his hand resting on her swollen belly. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you?" Eleanor took his hand and squeezed it. "You are not going to lose me, Tom Garrett. I am too stubborn to die, and besides, I have plans for us. This is just the beginning." Their son was born on a freezing January morning in 1881, arriving early and fast, before the doctor could even make it up the hill. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had come to stay with them during the final weeks, helped deliver the baby while Tom paced outside in the cold, convinced something terrible was happening every time he heard Eleanor cry out. But then there was a different sound, the sharp, demanding wail of a newborn, and Mrs. Rodriguez opened the door with tears streaming down her face. "You have a son," she said, "and Eleanor is fine, tired but fine. Come meet your boy." Tom entered the bedroom on shaking legs and found Eleanor propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny wrinkled creature with a shock of dark hair and a surprisingly loud voice. "Tom," Eleanor said softly, "come see our son." Tom approached the bed like he was approaching something holy. He reached out with one calloused finger and touched the baby's impossibly small hand, and tiny fingers immediately curled around his own in a grip that felt like it could anchor the world. "He is perfect," Tom whispered. "Eleanor, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Tom's father, with the middle name of Edward, which surprised Tom until Eleanor explained. "He was not a perfect man, my father, but he gave me life, and he gave me that money which helped us build all this. I want to remember the good parts, even if there were not many of them." Parenthood was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. James proved to have healthy lungs and firm opinions about everything from sleep schedules to the temperature of his milk. Tom learned to function on fragments of sleep, stumbling out to work the horses while Eleanor nursed the baby. They took turns pacing the floor during fussy nights, singing lullabies and telling stories and making promises about the life they would give this child. "He will grow up free," Eleanor said one night, holding James against her shoulder while Tom rubbed her aching back. "Free to choose his own path, to be whoever he wants to be." "Agreed," Tom said. "Though if he wants to be a banker like his grandfather, we might need to have a serious talk." Eleanor laughed, the sound tired but genuine. "If he wants to be a banker, we will support him, even if it kills us." As James grew from infant to toddler, the house on the hill grew too. Tom added 2 more rooms, a proper bedroom for James and a spare for visitors or future children. He built a barn for the horses, a chicken coop, a smokehouse. Eleanor expanded her school, hiring a young woman from town to help teach when enrollment doubled. They were building something real, something lasting, a legacy that went beyond just themselves. The town's opinion of them had shifted too. What had started as scandalous gossip had transformed into respect. Tom and Eleanor Garrett were known as hard workers, good neighbors, people who kept their word. The fact that their marriage had been built on love rather than convenience no longer seemed shocking, just sweetly romantic. Young couples in town began referencing them as proof that following your heart could lead somewhere good. When James was 3, Eleanor became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she continued teaching almost until her delivery date. Their daughter was born in the spring, a tiny thing with Eleanor's gray eyes and Tom's stubborn chin. They named her Rose, and she proved to be quieter than her brother, content to observe the world with solemn attention. Tom stood on his porch one evening when Rose was about 6 months old, holding his daughter while watching James chase chickens in the yard. Eleanor came up beside him, slipping her arm around his waist, and together they looked out at the land they had built their life on. "Do you remember when I first told you to give me 3 months?" Tom asked. "I remember thinking you were insane," Eleanor said. "A cowboy I barely knew anymore, promising to build me a house and offering me a life I could not even imagine. And now I cannot imagine any other life. This house, this land, these children, it is everything I never knew I needed." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "The whole town whispered I was too proud for a cowboy. Do you remember?" "I remember," Tom said. "And I remember just smiling because I knew something they did not." "What did you know?" "I knew that pride had nothing to do with it. You were not too proud. You were too precious to settle for less than you deserved. And I was determined to prove I could give you exactly what you needed, even if I had to build it with my own 2 hands. Eleanor turned to look up at him, her eyes shining with tears and love and 7 years of shared history. "You built me more than a house, Tom Garrett. You built me a home. You gave me freedom and respect and partnership and love. You gave me a life worth living." Tom kissed her there on the porch, with their baby daughter sleeping against his chest and their son's laughter ringing through the evening air and the sun setting over the valley they had claimed as their own. It was not a perfect life, because perfect lives did not exist outside of storybooks. But it was a true life, an honest life, a life built on love and hard work and the belief that people deserved to choose their own destiny. The years rolled on, marked by seasons and harvests and the steady growth of their children. James grew into a serious boy who loved the horses almost as much as his father did, spending hours in the barn learning to train and care for them. Rose proved to have her mother's sharp mind and love of learning, often found with her nose buried in books even before she could properly read the words. They had one more child, another son they named Samuel, who arrived when James was 7 and Rose was 4, completing their family with his cheerful disposition and endless energy. The ranch prospered. Tom's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout Texas and beyond, and he could barely keep up with demand. Eleanor's school became a cornerstone of the community, educating 2 generations of Valley children and proving that a woman could be both a mother and a professional, both strong and gentle, both proud and humble. They added on to the house twice more, expanding it until it sprawled across the hilltop like a testament to their growth as a family. Edward Hartwell's old house in town, the one that had seemed so grand when Eleanor was a girl, eventually fell into disrepair and was torn down to make way for a new town hall. Eleanor felt nothing but relief when she heard the news. That building had represented everything she had escaped from, all the expectations and limitations that had nearly crushed her spirit. The house on the hill, the one Tom had built with his own hands, that was the only home that mattered now. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tom took Eleanor back to the church where they had been married. It was a Saturday evening, and they had left the children with Mrs. Rodriguez for the night, a rare gift of solitude. They stood in the empty church, holding hands, remembering who they had been on that day a decade earlier. "If you could go back," Tom asked, "would you change anything?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "I would tell my father I loved him one more time, even though he made me so angry. I would save myself some worry about whether I was making the right choice. But the choice itself? No, I would make the same choice 100 times over, even knowing how hard it would be sometimes, especially knowing that the hard parts made us stronger. They taught us how to weather storms together, how to fight without breaking, how to build something that lasts." Eleanor reached up and touched Tom's face, her fingers tracing the lines that 10 years of sun and wind and laughter had etched there. "You gave me everything I needed, Tom. Not because you bought me things or gave me an easy life, but because you saw who I really was and loved me anyway. Because you built me a house on a hill and filled it with children and laughter and possibility." They renewed their vows that evening, speaking the words to each other in the empty church with no witnesses except God and their own hearts. When they returned home, riding up the hill in the late summer twilight, the house blazed with light. James had apparently convinced Mrs. Rodriguez to let them light every lamp, and the result was a beacon that could probably be seen from town, a glowing declaration of life and love and home. As Tom and Eleanor approached, they could hear their children's voices through the open windows, James reading a story to his younger siblings, Rose correcting his pronunciation, Samuel laughing at all the wrong parts. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. "This is what we built," Eleanor said, gesturing at the house, the barn, the land stretching away in every direction. "Not just structures, but a family, a life." "We built it together," Tom corrected. "Every bit of it." They climbed down from the wagon and walked hand in hand toward their home, toward the light and laughter spilling out into the gathering darkness. Tomorrow, there would be work to do. Horses to train and children to teach, and 100 small tasks that made up the fabric of their days. But tonight was for celebration, for remembering how far they had come and how much they had built. The town had whispered that Eleanor Hartwell was too proud for a cowboy, that she would never adapt to ranch life, that the marriage was doomed from the start. But the townspeople had been wrong about so many things. Eleanor had not been too proud. She had been exactly proud enough, strong enough to know her own worth and brave enough to fight for the life she deserved. And Tom had not been just a cowboy. He had been a man with vision and determination, someone willing to build a future out of nothing but love and lumber and sheer stubborn will. On their 15th anniversary, Tom surprised Eleanor by planting roses along the entire length of their porch. He had ordered them specially from a nursery in Austin, a climbing variety that would eventually cover the railings in blooms. "So you can have beauty right outside your door," he explained, watching Eleanor's face light up with delight. "As if I need more beauty," Eleanor said, gesturing at the view of the valley, at the sunset painting the sky in impossible colors, at their children playing in the yard. "I am surrounded by it every day." But she loved the roses, tending them carefully and training them along the porch rails until, several years later, the entire front of the house burst into color every spring. Visitors approaching the house on the hill would see it from miles away, wreathed in flowers and glowing with life, and would know they were coming to a place where love had taken root and flourished. James grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the horse training business from his father. He married a girl from town, the daughter of the new banker who had taken over Hartwell's old position, and brought her to live on the ranch in a small house Tom helped him build on the far end of the property. Rose left for college in Austin at 17, determined to become a teacher like her mother, but wanting to bring education to even more remote parts of Texas. Samuel, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by declaring his intention to become a veterinarian, wanting to care for the animals he had grown up around. Tom and Eleanor watched their children leave and return, leave again and put down their own roots, and felt the bittersweet satisfaction of having raised humans who knew their own minds. "We did what we promised," Eleanor said one evening as they sat on their porch, now older and grayer but no less devoted to each other. "We raised them to be free." "That we did," Tom agreed, "though I will confess I did not anticipate how much it would hurt to watch them fly away." "They always come back," Eleanor reminded him, "and besides, we still have each other." They did have each other. Through good years and lean years, through droughts and floods and economic panics, through the changing times that brought automobiles and telephones to even remote parts of Texas, Tom and Eleanor remained constants in each other's lives. They argued sometimes, passionate debates that reminded them both why they had fallen in love in the first place. They laughed often, finding humor in the small absurdities of life. They worked side by side, maintaining the ranch and the school and the life they had built. On their 30th anniversary, the whole valley came to celebrate with them. There was a party that spilled across their entire property, with tables laden with food and musicians playing on the porch and children racing through the fields. Tom and Eleanor stood in the center of it all, accepting congratulations and toasts and good wishes, marveling at how the tiny kernel of love they had planted so long ago had grown into something that touched so many lives. "I built you a house on a hill," Tom said, pulling Eleanor close for a dance as the sun set over the valley they had made their own. "But you built me a life worth living. You gave me purpose and family and more love than any man deserves." "We built it together," Eleanor insisted, echoing words from decades earlier. "Every bit of it, Tom, together." As they danced under the stars, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends and neighbors, Tom thought about that young cowboy who had stood outside the livery stable 32 years earlier, watching a proud woman step down from a carriage and wondering if he had any chance at all. That young man could never have imagined this, could never have dreamed that his impulsive declaration would lead to a lifetime of love and partnership, and building something that would outlast them both. The house on the hill stood solid and strong, its walls holding 3 decades of memories, its windows glowing with light and life. The roses Tom had planted climbed the porch rails in wild profusion, their perfume sweetening the evening air. And on the porch, in the rocking chairs they had bought to celebrate their 20th anniversary, Tom and Eleanor would sit in the years to come, watching sunsets and holding hands and knowing that they had done something rare and precious. They had built not just a house, but a home. Not just a marriage, but a partnership. Not just a life, but a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. The town had whispered. Tom had smiled. And together, they had built something beautiful on a hill overlooking the valley, something that would stand as proof that love combined with determination could overcome any obstacle, defy any expectation, and create a future worth fighting for. They had taken whispers and turned them into something solid, something real, something that would endure. And every evening, as the sun set over the Texas hills, and the lights came on in the house that love built, Tom and Eleanor Garrett would sit together and marvel at the beautiful life they had created, one day, one choice, one act of courage at a time.